The views and opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast creators, hosts, or that of Blue Door, CAEH, or their partners. The podcast may cover sensitive topics and discuss triggering issues. Listener discretion is advised. The content is intended for informational and discussion purposes only. Thank you for tuning in.
Would like to the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Welcome, Housers, to another episode of On the Way Home, a podcast with a huge focus on housing, homelessness, preventing homelessness, health, how it contributes and can help and to prevent homelessness, and much, much more. We are so fortunate on this podcast to have brilliant people who either live through an experience or sharing their experience, or experts in the field, researchers, people, social workers, CEOs, leaders, talking about challenges, but more importantly, focus on solutions to making things better and moving us forward. And I always nerd out on this stuff because these guests are so wonderful. It gives me a lot of hope in the most challenging of circumstances. This podcast is brought to you by the good people at Blue Door. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. Blue Door's an organization that's been around for 41 years, doing great work in the communities of York Region, Durham Region, Peel Region, just north of Toronto, helping to house people, keep people healthy, and link them to different health services, as well with our construction social enterprise construct, which is very, very cool. Both a construction social enterprise, building and doing renovations and bringing in revenue to help do our housing programs, not on the backs of government, but more importantly, training people and launching them into the trades so we can actually build the housing we need across this country. So that's a very cool program. If you want to find out about Construct or Blue Door, just go to our website at bluedoor.ca. We do this with our incredible partner, a leader in housing around the world. It is our friends at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, better known as CAEH. Tim Richter and the crew there are doing great work around advocacy. Recently, they were a big part in overturning a piece in Barrie where they were going to pass a bylaw to fine people for giving out food and water and different things to people experiencing homelessness. And the councillors took a step back, partially, I think, because of the wave of support that the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness brought aboard. And they do that and much, much more. They do all sorts of trainings. They do a massive conference, and this year is in Halifax. Go check it out. The lineup of speakers and presenters is incredible. I don't know how they do it year after year. It just keeps getting better, and it's in beautiful Halifax. So check them out at caeh.ca for that conference, for the advocacy work. You can subscribe to their newsletter and be in the know, but much, much more. They are our partners, Blue Door and the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Let's talk about today's guest. Quite often when we're having conversations around homelessness, we talk about community and the importance of building community. A large part of communities have been for hundreds of years libraries, right? And I think if you think back, you would think, what does a library have to do with homelessness? Well, many emergency housing programs really don't run during the day, or in the day you're encouraged to go out and get involved in your community. So they need somewhere to go. And so many vulnerable people and people of all walks of life, they go to their neighborhood library. And for a long time, when libraries were faced with this is a little challenging, working through this, they thought, do we turn to law enforcement, or do we hire security? What do we do? But instead, many libraries are looking at it in a different light to say, how can we be part of the solution? How can we serve people that are vulnerable and help them, and support them, and make them part of our community and integrate? And this guest today, we have Sarah with us today, Sarah Tarcea from from the North Vancouver Library, who's done an amazing job with that. They've created a program making their library very easily accessible. They've done all sorts of cool things. She shares stories of individuals. She talks about what she's going to present at the conference in Halifax. You want to sign up for her session. It's actually, she's part of a larger panel around libraries and their part and ending homelessness. I think it's called something like the untalked about, or so. It basically is around the fact that it's a day shelter, right, in a sense, because people are going there. But she talks about the programming that's there, how they got into it, her journey, and much, much more, in the part that libraries play and how their community has responded. It's a great conversation. I think it's an important conversation as we look to, it's not just about housing, but it's housing with community. Libraries are in communities. We need to break down those silos, and Sarah and the team in North Vancouver, or as they call it, North Van, are doing exactly that. So let's go to that conversation. I think you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Sarah, thanks so much for joining the podcast today. So glad to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. It's not too often that we have people from the library system joining us on this show. And people might say, libraries, what does that have to do with homelessness? But we're going to tell you soon, but not right away, because we first have to start with a question that we ask every guest, because it is extremely personal to everyone who comes on. And that is, what does home mean to you?
Great. I love that question. And I gave it some thought. And, as someone who recently had to move, one of the things that really stands out for me is stability as an aspect of home. So I just saw the impact of having to move on my family, on my daughters, myself and my husband, and there being a lot of uncertainty and change. And so I see how important stability is to this idea of home, just based on my recent experience.
I love that. Stability is crucial. And you know what's great about that question? There really isn't any wrong answer, because it's, what does home mean to you? But that is a great answer, I have to say. We always want to learn a little bit more about our guests, who you are, how you kind of got into what you're doing now. So if you could take us on that journey, it'd be most appreciated.
Sure. Yeah. I've always been a person who loved reading, and I've always been a person who loved learning. And so for me, libraries really felt like a natural fit. I did a master's degree of library and information studies back in 2011, and started my career in librarianship as a children's librarian. So singing lots of songs and just working on helping folks develop early literacy skills. I eventually shifted into adult services, and then now find myself as a manager of public services at the North Van City Library. Wasn't necessarily expecting to end up in a leadership position at a library, but I really enjoy getting to direct and shape how we deliver services to our community. It's been a really rewarding experience.
Now, for people that may not have thought about libraries as delivering to your community of just people coming in, friends, this is not your grandparents' library. This has changed in North Vancouver. You have a big presentation coming up at the Canadian Alliance on Homelessness conference. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the ways I think a lot of libraries have changed and developed over the years is that they've become hubs for the community. And one of our real strengths is that we are open, and we seek to be open and accessible to everybody in our community, including people who are more vulnerable. So one of the ways that we've tried to serve some of our more vulnerable community members here at the North Van City Library is by developing a specific program called the Open Door Community Hub, which is specifically for people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So for my presentation, I'm going to discuss what that program looks like here. But really, what's very important to me is making clear why public libraries should be part of the conversation around homelessness and the role that we can play in helping to end it. We certainly can't do it by ourselves, and we aren't the experts, but we do bring a lot of strengths and opportunities to the conversation.
Heck yeah, you do. And I've seen that time and time again. We were recently, I was fortunate enough to be part of a New York City study tour, and we visited the Brooklyn Library there, and they were doing some incredible work with the most vulnerable across that. And I love what you're saying, community hubs. I was just talking with a fellow West Coaster, Keir McDonald, And we're talking about, when you're talking about housing, it's not just about, as none of our guests ever say in their answer about what home means. It's not about the four walls and a roof. It's not just about that. It really is about community, and libraries are a big part of every community. So I love the fact that you see it as a hub and that it's a place for everyone right now. Now, let's talk a little bit about Vancouver. For people that might not know or might not be on the West Coast, what does homelessness really look like across the West Coast right now?
Yeah, I mean, not good. Things are really challenging here for folks. I mean, to start off, just the context in which we operate in, rent is really expensive. We have super low vacancy rates. And it just means that housing is a real challenge for people. We also have high eviction rates in BC, the highest in the country. So it means that even folks who do have housing, there's a sense of precarity, particularly for people who are in rental housing. So we see things like homelessness encampments in our communities. And when those are broken up, there's sort of nowhere for people to go. Our library, in our context, we're in an urban center, we're near the hospital, and we're near public transit centers. So we do have significant numbers of people who are experiencing homelessness or who are in precarious housing situations who use our services.
And I love the fact that I think traditionally, years ago, when people experiencing homelessness would visit a library, it would be, well, how do we deal with, or how do we police, or how do we make sure, because, but that's, especially with your library, you flip that to say, you're more than welcome here. In fact, we've developed this program. How did that come about? And what are the pieces? Can you talk to me a little bit about more of the programming that you're doing for these vulnerable individuals?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'll start off by saying it's not simple. And it's not just about folks who are experiencing homelessness. As a public library, we see conflict between people, between community and staff, just around how the space is supposed to be used. So folks have expectations that they're going to be able to come here and just quietly read. And then there's a story time happening on the first floor, and there's kids running around and screaming. So it's something that we deal with for just in general. As far as services for folks who are experiencing homelessness, one thing we did notice sort of once we reopened after our COVID closure was that we were seeing more vulnerable people in the library and also people with sort of more acute needs. And we sort of had to decide if we were going to go in the direction of increased security, making more rules, being kind of stricter with people, or if we were going to kind of try and meet people where they were at and see if there were services that we could provide that would be relevant for them. And so fortunately, we decided to go in the direction of really kind of leaning in and seeing what people needed from us and how we could serve them. And then also really, we don't do it on our own. So we have really strong connections with and our municipality to try and figure out the best way to serve folks. So for our services, what we offer is a twice a week drop-in program. It's open to everybody, but it is specifically for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. And it's a place where folks can get snacks and a hot drink. We offer packages. We have a dedicated staff person who is experienced with working with vulnerable folks who can provide information and referral. But we also offer fun. So we have film screenings, paint-along programs, lots of opportunities for social connection. And that's been one of the real successes that we've seen out of this program is friendships. Lots of friendships have formed. Folks are less socially isolated who participate in this program. And yeah, it's just been a real success for us as far as forming community.
And I love that you keep talking about community. And so, again, I talked with Kira about this too. That sense of sometimes what we've done in the past, and I work at an organization that supports vulnerable people, is in the past we'd get them into housing and it was kind of job done. And we've since learned you still need supports, and those supports look very different for different populations. But one of the big supports is connecting people to community, because when they're in a shelter system, that is their community, right? They have friends, they have staff that care, there's activities, there's support. And when they're on their own, although they might have someone checking in on them, if they don't feel that connection, what happens, Sarah, is sometimes they cycle back, unfortunately, to the street or to the shelter system out of housing. So libraries can really play in the programs you're talking about, building community and friendships will be very important to people actually retaining their housing, right, and staying in that community. Now, what's the reaction been? Do you have a lot of participants or people welcoming this?
Yeah, definitely. So as far as the program goes, we average around 200 visits a month, which is great numbers for us based on the size of our community. We have kind of a core group of folks who attend really regularly, and then we also have new people who kind of cycle in and out depending on their needs at the time. For staff, it's been really good. Sometimes it's challenging to work with vulnerable customers. Someone might show up who hasn't had a good night's sleep and they're hungry. And so when it comes time to, interact with a staff person, they're not going to be an easy person to work with. Having a program like this means that we're able to make connections with people. People see us in a good light. They're a lot more likely to have positive interactions with staff when they come in because of the experiences that they have at the Open Door Community Hub. So that's been a really positive outcome as well. And as far as our wider community here, we're quite lucky in North Vancouver in that I think in general people are quite compassionate towards homeless folks. Like any community, there's elements of maybe sort of a bit of NIMBYism, ideas that folks experiencing homelessness come from outside of North Vancouver, from larger urban centers. But I do find that's quite rare and that most people are very positive about the work that we're doing with this program.
Very cool. I was going to ask, you talked about some of them. Have there been any big challenges with the program or any adjustments you've had to make?
I would say at the beginning, just around what is an appropriate way to be in the library. We want to be really open and flexible with folks who attend the program, but we were having some interesting debates happening at loud volume. And we worked through it, and something that really helped fix that issue for us was actually the game Wordle. So we have group Wordle games at every session. They are hugely popular. Our attendees and our staff really love participating in it. And it's a really kind of positive way to bring people together, work together as a team, and keep the conversation on sort of a positive and less political, maybe, bent. And again, as far as community goes, we've really had mostly positive feedback from attendees and from folks who are just aware of the program.
Now, if I'm in North Vancouver, if I live there, I just refer to it as North Van. Is that the street lingo there?
Oh gosh, yes. You could just say North Van.
North Van, and then I'm good. Then I feel like I belong, right?
Yes, I say oh gosh just because there's North Van District and North Van City, and it's like hugely confusing for even the people who live here.
Very cool. Any stories coming out of it that stick with you of individuals who have participated or made friendships or good things that have happened?
Yeah, definitely. We have a gentleman who is he recently turned 80, and he was a regular library user, but always just kind of came by himself, and he would read a newspaper. And he started attending the Open Door Community Hub, and he has just been embraced by everyone, staff and attendees. So he recently celebrated his 80th birthday in the space with a little cake and candles. And you just see how someone who maybe wasn't having a huge social life has really made a lot of connections. So that's kind of one of my favorite friendships that have come out of the Open Door Community Hub.
So cool. And there's lots of data to support, so listeners understand too, when you're keeping the minds of people busy, when people are friends, social interaction, what it does not only for their physical health, but for their mental health as well. So just amazing. One of the first guests we had on in the previous, this was first Out of the Blue before it became On the Way Home, this podcast, was a gentleman out of Chicago, Ryan Dowd, and he is nicknamed the Homeless Librarian. And Ryan was great, so much so that he made so much noise that when Emilio Estevez made a movie around people experiencing homelessness, Ryan was his consultant on that. And Ryan has gone around. I remember talking with him, and Ryan runs and continues to run a shelter in the core of Chicago, but just talking to him about how it really was fluke that he got to ask to speak to some librarians. It hit YouTube, went viral, and now it's a large part of what he does.
Yeah, it's great to hear you mention Ryan Dowd because I should give him some credit for our approach. His idea around like empathy-based service is really influential in the way that we approach our services for all customers, but particularly for people who are more vulnerable. So yeah, he's a big name in the library world for sure.
Yeah, he's really great, and I know he puts out. If you subscribe to what he does, he'll send out things like, "Here's a situation when Ralph did this," and he changes the name, but here's how we work through it and helping. And as you said, I think most people are really well uh, intended. They just don't know. And the training of people, that long ago we said, well, when I went into, you know, librarian work, I never thought I'd be doing social work or doing, but are open to it and are training and changing. So it's a cool new world. Now, people, what is the name of your session at the conference if people want to go to the conference and sign up for it?
Sure. So my particular sort of presentation is called the de facto day shelter because that's what libraries tend to kind of be viewed as. But I'm part of a wider panel just around homelessness and public libraries. So I'm going to get to be speaking about this topic with some really great colleagues. Really excited about that.
I love that de facto, because you're absolutely right. I mean, so many programs too will say, "Hey, we're only open from this time to this time," and on the day during the day, you need to find a place and find a place that's cool when it's hot and has heating when it's freezing outside. And libraries are, as you said, a massive part of our community. It's incredible work that you're doing. We are thankful for the work that you and the team are doing and all you're doing to help prevent and end homelessness. If people want to find out more about the work you're doing or more about your the North Vancouver Library, where can they go?
Yeah, probably our website is the best place to start. So just nvcl.ca will take you to our website. There's more info about our specific programs there.
And are you all over social media as well? If people want
We
to,
are all over social media, so you can find us. North Van City Library is on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the big ones.
very cool. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time today. We'll see you next time on the way home.
Thank you so much, Michael. Have a great day.